Deb, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
It's my pleasure, Deb. So for those who don't know, Deb Mashek is a psychologist who applies relationship science to help people collaborate better. Why? Because skilled collaborators build strong teams, and strong teams build successful organizations and projects. And Deb's consulting business, Myco Consulting, specializes in helping teams to collaborate. And that's around improving collaboration on existing teams or building collaboration into new teams. And her new book, CollaborGREAT, is that how you say it?
Yes, CollaborGREAT. So I often talk about it as being a silent H also. So if you swallow the H, it still works.
Excellent. So CollaborGREAT, it's less about, I think, it's less about how to collaborate and more about how to create the conditions for collaboration. And that's absolutely something we need as project managers, and we need it right from the get-go, the start of our projects. And that is why I wanted to speak with Deb about how to build a collaborative project culture. So, Deb, welcome.
Thank you so much. And I mentioned this to you during the pre-show, I love how you frame this is about creating the conditions for those effective collaborations. So I suspect we'll return to that language a number of times over the conversation.
Absolutely. I make notes in the books I read that are worth making notes in. And at the front, it says this book is not about how to collaborate, but about how to create conditions. So it's exactly what I was thinking as I read it. And I think one of the things I normally do on these interviews is I start by establishing relevance and saying, why is it important to collaborate? But I don't think I need to ask why collaboration is so important in a project environment. I think that any project manager, and hopefully anyone who's considering a project management career, will know we cannot do our jobs without good collaboration. So let's get started on your ideas, because that's the real value in this. Your book is structured very much around a simple model. You call it the Mashek Matrix. So can you talk us through how that works and its practical implications?
Sure. So let's first add in the caveat if I get that this is a very self-referential name for something about collaboration. So there's that. And then second, this idea of why it matters for those project managers who are perhaps in a situation where they need to advocate for resources to help with, build the collaboration piece, making the point to our executives that this is about, obviously timelines and bottom lines, but also the well-being of our people. So this is worth investing in, as you all already know. So let's take a look at the Mashek Matrix.
Okay.
So as you can see, there are two dimensions here. One is relationship quality, and the other is interdependence. And so if we look first at relationship quality, what this is simply your subjective sense of how good or bad your relationship is with a particular other person. So when I do research with the Matrix, I'll ask questions like the relationship quality of their most preferred collaborator, their least preferred collaborator, the collaborator they work the most with. So there are a lot of ways you can kind of shape the item to reflect, or the items to reflect the relationship that you're evaluating. But really, is this a good relationship, a bad relationship? Is this what I feel good about or that I dislike? So that's the first dimension. The second dimension then is interdependence. Interdependence is, again, one of these words that is out there in the culture. So I feel like we have a sense of what it means, but what it means to a relationship psychologist is the extent to which your outcomes are tied to another person's behavior. And so when we're talking about interdependence, it's the extent to which you and I are sinking or swimming as a team. It's the extent to which, if you don't do your stuff on the project, it looks bad for me. So it has a reputational hit, or perhaps a monetary hit, or some value or some outcome that I value is influenced by what you're doing or what you're not doing. So you've got these two dimensions. Because it's a business book, you have to add in a 2x2 matrix, of course.
Absolutely.
And it's like a requirement. And so while both of these qualities exist on a continuum, you can also just kind of bin it into these high, low, high, low.
Yeah.
When you have really high relationship quality, really high interdependence, that's the state I call CollaborGREAT. This is where you trust the other person, you enjoy working with them, and your work is humming along. One person does part A, next person does part B, or someone has an idea and they bring it back into the group and everyone's energized around it and processing it. And I like to say this is where you get the glitter encrusted unicorns flying through the sky. This is deep collaboration. Things are humming along. It feels good to be a part of this project. In contrast, you have that same level of interdependence. So interdependence is high, but relationship quality is low. So I don't like working with you. I don't trust you. I don't think you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I was there when you said, yeah, I'll take care of that. And I have zero trust and you'll actually do any of those things. Yet my consequences, my outcomes are still tied to your behavior. That sucks. That's a horrible situation to be in. That's what I call CollaborGREAT. So those are the two key quadrants. But you look at this picture, you'll see like there's that thick brick wall in between CollaborGREAT and CollaborGREAT. Yeah, the big idea here, and this is really, to me, the most important thing from the entire book, is that it's really, really difficult to go straight from the CollaborGREAT quadrant to the CollaborGREAT quadrant. It's not just a matter of, you need to go do some trust falls, or what you should do is have a happy hour for the team, and somehow that's miraculously going to improve relationship quality. It might, but trying to do that while still having high interdependence, you're going to hit this brick wall. So, as a relationships researcher, I like to draw parallels back to our personal relationships.
Yeah.
It would be the equivalent of, say, a married couple heading toward divorce. Things are feeling really, really tense in the household. We finally decide, we should go see a marital therapist. If the therapist said, you know what you should do is just go have a nice dinner out, and that's going to fix everything. What she or he is saying is, let me say, they would never say that, because that's not how it works. Instead, what they would recommend is see if you can separate it in some way. Maybe one person moves to the basement. Maybe the resources are there. Somebody moves out and sets up another house. The whole point there is to decrease the interdependence, to give everybody a little bit of head space and heart space to actually work on improving the relationship quality before you come back together again. So that's the model. So if you're in a state of CollaborGREAT with a collaborator, or your team just isn't doing well, step number one is to actually think through, how do we decrease the interdependence a little bit? Then you work on relationship quality. Then you start to bring in more of that interdependence. And I suspect we're going to get to talk about, how do you turn those dials?
Absolutely.
Then?
Yeah. So let's pick that up, because that distinction between, if you like, the ideal CollaborGREAT and the nightmare scenario of a project team where everyone needs to work together to succeed and yet doesn't get on, that's key. So in your book, you give 9 very practical strategies for improving the relationships within a team. So could you share a couple that are particularly relevant, perhaps, to the temporary, sometimes quite long-term temporary teams that we find in projects?
Right. So, these ideas apply to whether it's something you're trying to jam on, some sort of sprint you're working on over the next 10 days, or if it's something that's more a project that's going to be unfolding for years. And I'll be curious if you have any favorites that you'd like to dig into. But I think some of the most relevant ones for the world of project management, one is around expectation setting. Yeah. So there are, I think, hundreds of things that you could potentially set expectations around at the beginning of a project. Thank God we don't go through all of those every single time we sit down to do a project, but having some intentionality around things like, what are our expectations, especially in this day and age, what are our expectations if we're meeting over Zoom? Are our cameras on or are they off? Why is that? What are our expectations around who's agendizing the meetings? What if somebody has something else to bring to the agenda? When will the call for agenda items go out? When are you expected to submit your proposed agenda items? Who decides what actually gets on there? And a lot of times that is, there's an established habit or practice around it, even if that habit or practice hasn't been made explicit, which can make it hard for newcomers to come onto the team, because whatever you're doing may not be what they've done before. So finding a way to represent or capture what you're doing and giving that to newcomers is great. Or if you're realizing, wow, we seem to have different expectations around turnaround time in response to messages, or, wow, we can't seem to figure out if we're going to use Slack or email or bulletin board in the coffee room. Those are all different, like communication channels or responsiveness. Those are all different layers that you could develop expectations around. And if you just kind of assume that whatever your expectations are shared by everybody else, you're setting yourself and the team up for some challenge. Why not take a few minutes at the beginning of a project to figure out what are the most important expectations to align around?
Absolutely.
So
and I know it's countercultural in some organizations, some cultures around the world, but that early kind of project kickoff meeting, whether you go for a formal team charter, which, everyone signs up to formally, or whether you just have the conversation, I think this is absolutely critical. And it is one of the ones I would have picked up on. Absolutely. So I like that. And I think that one will be one where project managers will be familiar with it. New project managers will have seen it and experienced it if they've worked on good projects. But underlining its importance is key. So what other one would you pick out? And then I'll perhaps share one of mine.
Yeah. So one of my other favorite ones is bring the donuts, which I don't I don't really mean bring the donuts unless you're working with me. Then I really, really love donuts. So please bring the donuts. But the idea is activate communal norms as opposed to exchange norms in the relationships. So all relationships, whether we're talking about the relationship we have with the bus driver who drives us across town, or the relationship we have with our romantic partner or our kids, all relationships exist on this continuum of exchange-oriented or communal-oriented. Yeah. An exchange relationship is very much this tit for tat. So I give my bus driver my $3. He drives me across town. I got on the bus and said, "Oh, drive me across town. I'll give you my $3 later. Don't worry, it'll even out. I'm going to get kicked off the bus." That's just not the way an exchange relationship works. It's very transactional. Contrast then is the communal relationship, where we put into the common good because it's the right thing to do, because we're making somebody else's world a little bit easier. We're not keeping score. I'm not tracking that I brought donuts this week and you didn't bring donuts, or you brought donuts last week and I owe you and I'm indebted to you. Instead, it's just about looking for small ways to do a little bit extra that improves somebody else's world. And if everybody is doing this on the team, it raises the tide, right? And it brings up all of the boats. And it's such a simple thing to do, like, "Oh, I'll take a first crack at that draft." Not a huge deal. Like, I got you. That's something easy I can do, so you don't have to go through the legwork of finding it. So those little actions improve the connection fabric on our teams, and that facilitates that relationship quality move.
Yeah, and actually, my experience as project manager is very much the value of that is very high. Firstly, you are the project manager, so people are kind of looking to you for a bit of leadership, and an easy way to set a tone is to actually literally to bring donuts or things. And certainly in the UK, there is a kind of culture of when it's your birthday, you bring cakes into work. I don't know about the US culture or East Coast culture. I guess US is a bit too big to have a single culture. If you are a project manager, as I was, delivering projects for clients, so that your team are not necessarily the same as the client team where you're doing your project, this kind of gesture is a great way of drawing teams together. I remember being on a large project, and my immediate team, my colleagues from the consulting firm, we were in one corner of the room and the client team was occupying the rest of the room, and that created a physical barrier. I mean, there was no physical barrier, but that spatial separation was mirrored in the culture. And one of the things I used to do was put a big bowl of sweets on my desk. And it's amazing how people think of reasons to come and see you when there's an appealing bowl of sweets on your desk.
I love that.
So it's a great one.
I was just going to say that echoes for me too, the advice around self-disclosure and actually getting to know the other people and as individuals, and to not treat like somebody from that other team as an avatar that you somehow know all about them because of the title that they have or the particular role they're playing on the team, but actually getting curious and what interests you here? What are you hoping to get out of this project? What do you want to learn? And not just to know, like, this very mechanical. Which of these list of outcomes do you think we should prioritize? More around what's something you're curious about learning here? How is this going to improve your world, your personal life, things like that? But then also being willing to share those things about yourself and being known, and not just talking about work. If you're feeling comfortable disclosing a little bit about what did you do this weekend, it helps people see you as a person, which makes it a heck of a lot easier to care about you and to invest in this relational piece too.
There's two that really resonated with me. The first one was the one about being responsive. And the reason that resonated with me is because one of the things that we need to do as a team is come to trust one another. And we need to build that trust quickly, and then we need to maintain that trust. And one of the keys to being trusted by the people around you is absolutely to be diligent in doing what you say you will do. The problem is that if I say I'm going to do something and it's a big old task, I can be working away diligently at it, but you don't know I'm working away diligently at it, and therefore you're wondering whether Mike is really focused on the thing he promised to do. So that responsiveness needs to be quite a proactive responsiveness, in the sense of that if you can be proactively responsive and let people know how things are going. If you're working on a project, we've got stakeholders who want to know what's going on. They don't want 2 weeks of radio silence. They want to know something's going on, because some of them will have that mindset. If I haven't heard from you, then you're not thinking about me.
I would love to underline that. So all of us carry with us our habitual modes of thinking and being in relationships. And if somebody let's even do something more more closely related. Imagine someone's previous project, somebody who is kind of like Mike, or in Mike's role, who had a big piece like Mike, actually did drop the ball. And now you're working with somebody who has a history of being burned, who, it's harder for them to trust. Now they're coming in with this extra load. It's going to be harder for them to trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And so one of the ways we can care for each other is exactly what you're saying is go ahead and over communicate. Send that 2-day in memo of just saying, hey, just following up, letting you know I'm working on this. Here's some of the, the duckies that are in the stream already. And I'll loop back and, let's check in next week either way, just so I can make sure to keep you updated on how that's going, and it's anticipating that some of us, myself included, can be in a place of really high anxiety around whether or not other people are going to be doing their stuff. And so it could be fairly triggering when we're operating in silence, even if you're working your tail off over there. So I think that's such a great example.
Yeah. The other one I liked is there's one about not telling yourself stories about things, making up stories about things. And one of the things we know about projects is we're doing something difficult, possibly something that's never been done before, and things will go wrong. And the temptation is to find excuses, to find reasons why it happened. And genuine causes, they're important, because those are the route into solutions. But excuses, and on the other side of it, blame, just do not progress the project in any way. So we should avoid trying to come up with reasonable excuses and for why I didn't do this or why it didn't work, and actually just own up to the fact that things go wrong and have gone wrong, and don't go for blame, go for solutions. And I think that's really important. Again, it's linked to your idea of self-disclosure. It's about building trust through being honest and open about the fact that we are doing something unusual, we're doing something different, and consequently making mistakes is part of the process. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning, you're not pushing.
And I love that point too, of the stuff that we're doing generally, where we need the really deep collaboration. It's worthy of hardness. If it was easy, other people would have already figured it out, or you wouldn't need a bunch of people working on it together in the first place. Yeah. And the storytelling thing, it's so easy to go into like, oh, if I screwed up, it was a function of the situation. Somebody else dropped the ball, or somebody else didn't give me their, the materials they need. And it's this very blamey thing. But when other people have a fail, as we all do, it's easy for our minds to go to stories around, well, they're incompetent, or they weren't paying attention, or they weren't as particular as they should have been, as opposed to being curious about, well, why did that happen? And like you said, what can we learn from it? And what can we do differently next time? So it doesn't happen again?
Collaboration is a function of the nature of projects. And one of the things that I find a little disappointing is none of the project management organizations whether it's the PMI, the big, US-based project management organization, or the APM in the UK, or any of the others that I'm aware of, none of them include in their definition of a project the interconnected nature of a project, that it is multiple tasks that are interdependent. And that's a word that you use. And so we need collaboration, because if the project were just a number of tasks that could be done by individuals without collaborating, then it wouldn't be a project. It'd just be a bunch of tasks. But the fact that we can't make the project happen unless these tasks are coordinated means that the people doing the different tasks have to collaborate. So I think that's really important. But let's move on from the relationship side now, because there's that interdependency is the other axis on your 2x2 matrix. And again, you offer some strategies for optimizing the level of interdependence. So perhaps we can pick out some of our favorite examples on that. So what are your favorite examples for, or relevant examples for how to build the right level of interdependence amongst a team?
Right. So first of all, I love that you let us talk a little bit about the matrix at the beginning. So one of the points there is that sometimes you want to amp up interdependence and sometimes you want to rev it down. So it's a dial that you can turn up or down. That's important. Yeah. And this whole idea of interdependence concerns the frequency of influence, the diversity of influence, and the strength of influence. And so, one of my favorite, maybe we could talk about one from each, I don't know. One of my favorites is really on the strength piece, thinking about how work is structured, measured, and rewarded. Yeah. Because I feel like there are a lot of corporate situations, actually in life, a lot of situations where there's this raw sense of, yay, collaboration, we value it. Oh my gosh, we've got it on our letterhead. Or you walk into the office and someone made a really beautiful stencil on the wall and it says collaboration and innovation and teamwork. And it's like we hold these as values. But then the way the work is actually rewarded is all about individual effort, or, the dashboards for project progress or something like that is all about what did all of the individuals do? And it's almost that there's no team visible in that piece. So one of my favorite tips there is to be intentional about aligning the incentives of, what we say we want to see and what we actually reward, because any parent or pet owner will tell you that what gets rewarded gets repeated. Yeah. And, that's absolutely true. So how do we structure our work in a way that honors the collaborative goal of a lot of that work?
And you do talk about how we track progress. And I think that's one of the things that project managers are good at. We've got lots of tools for that. But we should be using that, to my mind, as a way of celebrating success at regular and frequent intervals. One of my big things is, use more milestones rather than fewer milestones, because each time you acknowledge a milestone, then there is that mental kind of buzz for the whole team that we've achieved something worthwhile. I think that's really important.
Right. Give those dopamine hits. So I spent the first part of my career as a professor. And so professor world, you have to both, publish research and teach. I really loved the teaching because every single day I could go into that classroom and make something amazing happen and see the students' faces light up. That was my dopamine hit. But oh my gosh, research where those markers of, we've succeeded are like years apart, and it felt like such a slog. So I totally agree with you. Having milestones to celebrate early and often is a great thing for the spirit.
Yeah. What's another way that we can dial up and down the interdependence to really optimize the team?
I think another one is the frequency dial. So we do have some choices in how often we're connecting with each other. So, it could be that there's a standing meeting, depending on what project management strategy you're using. Maybe it's once a week, but maybe that's actually not enough time for people to have made progress. So maybe you change the frequency dial a little bit and say, you know what, we're going to every 2 weeks. That I don't even know if this is a viable option in your world. Yeah. But it could also be, we are pinging each other on Slack every 2 minutes. That's too much. Let's create an afternoon power hour or a morning power hour where we exchange a bunch of information so that we can give everybody a break from thinking about this particular project. So it's almost like some cognitive headspace where we don't have to be tagged by other people quite as frequently. So if people are feeling kind of overwhelmed and suffocated by the work on a particular team, finding those ways of creating some breathing space can be really helpful.
Yeah. And actually, one of my strong feelings is that we should be getting away from a rigorous adherence to a cycle. The cycle that we have of our team meetings, of our reporting, needs to change as the project evolves. Now, clearly, if you're working in an agile environment where you've actually got perhaps a 2-week iteration, then that has a frequency of its own, and it has its own rituals and components to it. But in general, if you assume that a long project is going to have the same cycle on day one and on day 600 to 2 years down the line, then you're crazy, because the priorities of the project and the focus is going to change. And I think we've got a lot of people working hard on something, so let's create a different way of people checking in with one another that doesn't require people to check in if they don't need to, if they want the headspace. I think that's absolutely right. And that's related to the one that really resonated with me, which is you talk about literally pulling people, or can't remember what the phrase you use is, but the idea that we are interdependent, we're working together as a team, but sometimes actually let's have people pull people out and let them work independently. And give people the freedom to work independently. And I think as a project manager, one of the things we can do to de-risk our projects is to look for opportunities to find components of the project which can operate independently of other components. And that has two benefits. Firstly, the collaboration benefit of giving us a chance to dial down the interdependence when people need it. They can work on something without feeling as beholden to their colleagues. So it's kind of liberating. But the other thing is that if things go wrong on that component, because it's been separated, then you've isolated the risk, and that risk doesn't contaminate the rest of the project. And if you need to fix what's going on in that part of the project, you can do so with the rest of the project running happily. So I like the idea of recognizing that a team is a collaborative, interdependent group, but it can at times split into smaller groups or into individuals to meet the needs of the project and the team.
Yeah, so there are at least there are these three general buckets of ways that work tends to get organized. One is divide and conquer, where it's like, I'll go work on this piece, you go work on this piece. And there's times when that's totally appropriate. And like you said, it could give everybody a nice break. Like, go have some independence as opposed to interdependence. And then there's, sequential workflows where, as I understand waterfall, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a very, very much of the waterfall idea where there's a specific deliverable, and then we know it goes on to another team, and they're clear handoffs. People add their value at a particular time, and then it goes over to another person. And that's kind of in the mid-level in terms of interdependence, where there's some you're some reliant on somebody else, but
the whole of project planning is predicated on there are some things that have a logical sequence to them, whether it's a predictive waterfall paradigm you're working in, or even with agile projects, there are some aspects of a development that you cannot do until you've got the infrastructure in place to do it. And it may or may not be different team members that do it.
Yeah. And then the most interdependent is this really just pooled, where we're not sure. There is no pre-planned, this is exactly how it's going to unfold. And that's really high on interdependence. So depending on where your team is, both in the project, but also in terms of their relationship quality, you can start choosing those different tools to put into play. So as opposed to feeling like any one particular tool or one approach is super precious. I don't know if this happens in project management world, but I know, all of us get used to a particular way of doing, and it becomes sacred in a way that might not actually be helping relationship piece.
Yeah, and absolutely. And typically the time when it becomes most collaborative is when there's a problem and you need a range of different minds and different perspectives to find a good selection of possible solutions and to really think about the best way to solve it. And there's a lovely framework that comes out of the Honda Motor Corporation called Waigaya. And the idea is that there's a problem and everyone comes together and talks about ideas. But one of the principles of Waigaya is as soon as I contribute an idea, I no longer own it, the group does. So that then the group will talk about it and the group will decide the value of that idea. And if the group decides it's the right idea, then the group will pursue it and allocate it to someone. But, no pride of authorship once you have
I
something.
love
And that's
how
true
that,
collaboration.
yeah, that lets, it takes ego off the table. So I like to say, ideally in collaboration, you leave your egos and logos at the door. So logos meaning you have, teams from multiple organizations trying to come together, and that's easier said than done sometimes. But to have a process or a norm of, we're sharing this, it now belongs to the group, I think is so beautiful.
Brilliant. So we've talked a bit about each of the dimensions. So let's kind of bring it all together, because there's a great chapter where you list ideas for how to improve collaboration, drawing from the Mashek Matrix. But there's a kind of list in there that kind of reminded me a lot of the principles of agile project management in particular. But that's the chapter where you've got quite a chunky flowchart around building collaboration. So can you kind of outline to us how you go about building a collaboration? If I'm a project leader, I've got my team. What's the broad picture of how I go about building that collaborative team?
Yeah, so I'll say that DIY workshop, I use it with clients who are frankly in a space of distress. So, or maybe they're not in CollaborGREAT, but they're maybe more on the emerging side, and they're looking to get over to that CollaborGREAT side. But I think your question to me is even a more interesting one than, how about the model, but it's really about how do you start from scratch? Like what would I be prioritizing?
Yeah.
If I had my druthers and I got to pick my team member, the first thing I would be looking for are collaborative individuals. That there are some people who are particularly, they think favorably about collaboration. They like it. They see the value in it. And they have the right skill sets. So they have basics down, like how to communicate, how to be responsive, how to do, even if they're not themselves project managers, they have the basics of time management and project management, and it seems a little crazy to say that out loud, to imagine that people make it into the professional world not having those skills. But unfortunately, sometimes they do. So let's imagine that we get to pick our collaborative individuals. I would start there. The next thing I would prioritize is the relationship quality piece. Before you start structuring the work, before you get people into their XYZ ABC here, do this, do this, do this. Take a beat, take a breather to get to know each other as individuals. So, those questions we talked about earlier. What's in it for you? Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
What are you nervous about? Like, what's the worst case scenario and what would be a disastrous experience for you, and why is that, and help me understand so I can help protect your needs and interest. Doing that at the top of a project is fantastic because it builds up that relationship quality, and prioritizing a little bit of time at every meeting rather than starting the meeting right on the dot. Show up 5 minutes early like we used to do around the conference table and talk to the people who are there, not necessarily about, I went to this one meeting recently where I signed on and there were tons of other people in the room. The people who had their screens on were clearly, or their cameras on, were clearly doing something else, like paying invoices or something. And I kept trying to say, hi, Mike. I'm trying to break in, like, what are you doing? How was your weekend? Trying to do small chat, get to know you, and was shut down every single conversation I started. And it felt like such a wasted opportunity. So, when I think about when we start collaborations, how could we be more intentional around using that space? So those are, that's really the direction you wanted to go, but we could talk about the culture piece too, as a kind of a bigger piece of that context that enables collaboration.
Please do. What do you mean by the culture piece?
Yeah. So this whole idea of, and I love, again, the distinction you made at the top, where there are different contexts that create conditions for collaboration. Totally resonates with me as a social psychologist, where the question we always ask is, or the thing we always say is, behavior is a function of the person and the situation.
Yeah.
So when we think about, well, what is that situation?
Is that Kurt Lewin's equation?
Yeah, that's the father of social psychology.
We love Kurt Lewin on this channel.
Oh, good. Excellent. This will totally resonate. So the behavior that we're trying to drive or nudge are those good collaboration behaviors.
Yeah.
The person, that individual, is what that individual is bringing in terms of their skill sets, their mindsets, their dispositions. So, their beliefs about other people's responsiveness, their other people's trustworthiness, and so on. behavior is a function of the person and the situation. The situation you can think of as at least there are three layers there.
Mm-hmm.
One is that relationship situation. So my immediate relationship context, which is what we've been talking about this whole conversation. It's what the whole book is about.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next layer of context is the collaborative action context. So what are we doing in terms of our tools and processes and people, which is, as I understand project management, a lot of what project management concerns.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then there's this third, more distal layer of context, which is culture. And you can think about culture in terms of, ideally, in my mind, the organization. So this is especially important if you're going to have any interdepartment or interdivision sorts of collaborations, which so many are, right? Where you need finance and tech and marketing and strategy. It's like, of course, they're multidisciplinary. At the cultural level, you need these 5 pieces in place. You need to make collaboration possible. And we do that through our infrastructure. So if it's not even possible to, to get a directory of the other people in the department or a department over there, for instance, then you don't even know who you're going to be able to collaborate with. So very, very basic. Next, you need to make collaboration.
You say it's basic, but it's one of the things that I learned early on as a project manager. As you go into a new project, one of the first things you do is you start to build that directory of who is involved and who is peripheral to the project. And I like to draw sociograms, actually bubbles, and link people up so that I can get a sense of that and what's the phone number for each of them, the email address and whatever. So that is, if you're a new project manager and you're landing on a new project, then that is absolutely a golden tip, is start to feel, I'm an old guy. I used to fill my notebook with all the contacts and how people knew each other and who was connected. Build that up, because that will be a resource you can use and develop throughout the project. So that's a great one. And that's only the first of 5, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and what's cool there too is inviting this broader perspective of who really are the stakeholders. So it's not necessarily just the people who are going to be on the project around the team with you, but their supervisors, their clients, their even sometimes thinking about, their spouse is at home. If the work is going well, then there's well-being for everybody involved. So it's okay to think broadly. You're not going to be calling their spouse at home, for the record. But just, who all is at play here? And then the second layer is you need to make it easy, collaboration easy. And we do that through our interfaces. So, for instance, when we all transitioned to remote work in 2020, suddenly, thank God Zoom existed and a bunch of us were able to adopt it, because otherwise there was a sense of, how are we going to stay in touch with everybody, especially because some places had, policies like you couldn't publish your home phone number or something. And so also it's like the interfaces have made it really hard all of a sudden to do that remote work. We were able to generally adjust. So make it possible with infrastructure, make it easy with the interfaces. The next one is to make it normative, to make collaboration normative through our communities, through our practices, what we put in our newsletters. You can look at your handbooks for employees. Are we actually talking about this thing? Are we, around the table celebrating that Mike and Deb did this really cool thing together? So telling stories about it. So there are all these things you can do to make collaboration normative, and that supports creating a collaborative culture. Fourth one then is you want to make collaboration rewarding. We do this through the incentives, and we talked a little bit about this, but if we say collaboration rah, but then we don't actually hold it up as an example of what we're looking for, and giving those, giving the good collaborators or the collaboration team the bonuses, the recognitions, putting their stories in the newsletter. There are all these things that you can do that really backs up the statement that you care about this. And then ultimately, if you have to, you can make collaboration required. So it's a little more of a stick than a carrot, I suppose. But there are some laggards who will, dig in their heels, and they'll want to go soul. The soul. I don't know. In the U.S., there's the Marlboro Man, like this cowboy renegade, the soul actor. Like there are those people who prefer to work like that, and you might need to compel them in a different way to actually contribute to the stone soup of collaborative projects.
Yeah. That's excellent. Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground, and we're coming to the end. But before we do finish, is there anything that you think is important that hasn't come up in the conversation we've had? Something I should have asked you about? Any tips or whatever?
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground. And the thing that I find myself wanting to double click on is this insight around the work that we're doing that requires collaboration in the first place. It tends to be really big, twisty, ill-defined problems where it's innovating products that don't exist before, identifying solutions to the world's trickiest problems. And none of these things are things that any one of us can possibly do alone. So finding ways of doing it together with less pain and more productivity and more satisfaction and self-expansion is totally worth it. It's really hard, but I think it's worthy of that hardness.
Yeah. I think that's a nice message, because when you look at the different ways that people can work together, collaboration isn't the only way we can work together. You know, I can tell you what to do and just expect you to do it. I can let you do what you feel like doing and pretty much accept whatever you do. Collaboration is much harder than any other way of working. So we have to almost save it for when it's worth the effort, when it's worth it. And I think there is a kind of expectation that we should always be collaborating on everything. And I think you've nicely highlighted that actually there are times when collaboration isn't going to be easy, and easing off on it is going to be the right thing to do. So that's really nice.
Yeah. Can I just say, I love this point too about, co-labor literally means together work. And there are so many different ways you could do that. You could just exchange information, or Arthur Himmelman has this fabulous collaboration continuum where on the low end, it's exchanging information, whatever, easy. And then on the next level up, you're exchanging information and you're modifying your activities a little bit harder. The next level up, now we're also sharing our resources, broadly construed. And then another layer up is where you start to learn from each other. And that is, in his view, what true collaboration is, where you put the needs of others on par with your own. And oh my gosh, so intensive. And we should not be doing it just because it feels right or somebody tells us it's the right thing to do. We should do it because the outcomes that will be experienced by the individuals justify that hard work of doing it together.
That's great. So, Deb, if people want to find out a bit more about you, engage with you perhaps, or access your book, what are the best ways for people to get in touch or to find out more about you? And we'll put them into the description as well.
Yeah, the one-stop shop is debmashek.com. And from there, you're able to get information about the book. Obviously, all of my social handles are there. My little experiment at the moment is TikTok. So I'm trying to jump on there and drop little, 1 or 2 minute ideas about how to become a better collaborator. And then if you would like to have more of these tips delivered straight to your inbox, you can also sign up to my twice monthly newsletter there. Super short, always useful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Deb Mashek. It has been an absolute delight. So thank you very much for your time, and good luck with CollaborGREAT.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. And this was a very fun conversation for me as well.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content. So please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.